Yeah, I think I mean, having just been here, last year I was here on vacation. This is sort of so I'm about a day and a half into a business trip here of getting the insights around what to do. I think that the mobile element is something that immediately jumps out at me. Like, I think that making sure that your startup has some kind of mobile element is really important. And I would actually say, like, making sure that you're addressing not only smartphones, but also feature phones. Because one of the most important things is just making sure that you have broad reach, right? That, network effects are really strong, word of mouth is really strong. The more people who can use your product, it's just something that can ultimately really, really help you gain adoption. I think that is really important. And I think that, the other insight that comes from Google is that I think that micropayments, even tiny little bits of money, can make a huge difference. When we started at Google, what was prevalent on the web was display advertising, right? Everything, was these huge banner ads, and we had people mailing us every day saying, please don't put banner ads on your site, please don't put banner ads on your site. Because the banner ads were like really obnoxious, and they were ultimately really losing value. That was how people made money on the web. And I remember when we had this idea of like maybe we could target text ads, because the crazy thing was in that height of the bubble, people were going to a creative agency and having them do a really pretty graphic or a really pretty animation and spending like a couple $1,000s to have that banner ad made. And we said, maybe what if we did like little grubby text ads where, one company could literally write 2,000 of them, but it could be one person sitting down for an afternoon writing out a bunch of ads, and those ads could be super targeted at the search, and they'd be way cheaper to make, because instead of having like fancy graphic artists working on a banner ad for a really long period of time, you could have lots and lots of ads. If those ads don't work well, then you can also throw them away and make new ads. And so we had this idea of like, what if we had lots of ads and we charged a really small amount of money to place the ads, and so like, the cost of making the ad was low, the cost of placing the ad was low, what would happen? And a lot of people thought it was just crazy. In fact, one of our VPs of sales, and I won't call the person out by name, I remember when the idea came up, where we were like, okay, like let's just give this a try. And this person leaned over to me and was like, well, this will be fun, but we're going to be selling banner ads by September, right? And I do think, people were very skeptical of could those pennies add up, right? And I remember actually when people were mailing us and asking us not to put banner ads on the site, they'd be like, Google search is so good, we'll pay you. And we actually got a few like unsolicited checks in the mail, believe it or not, from like users who were just like, Google search is so good, like I just feel the need to like write you a check. But it was amazing was like, and I had a lot of my friends who were just like, well, wait, like is advertising really going to work? Banner ads aren't working. You guys have these ideas for these text-based ads, and basically here's how the math worked. Was I would say they'd be like, look, your search is so good, we'll pay you, and I'd say, great. How much are you willing to pay us? And I apologize because all these numbers are going to be U.S.-based numbers, and they, because of the costs and the conversion rates, they don't really compare. My friends would be like, I would pay $20 a year to use Google search. Like, it's just that good. I'd be like, okay, so let's say, and I was like, and it's a total stretch, but let's say we could make a penny a search. Right, that someday we have so many ads, they're so targeted that when you amortize the cost of them, we could ultimately make a penny a search. They say, okay, and I say, well, how many searches do you do a day? And they'd be like 20. We do 20 searches a day. And I say, okay, so let's imagine that you do 20 searches a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, right? Like, that means if we could actually get the advertisement so good that we could make that penny per search, you would price the service at $20 because these advertisers see an opportunity to be in front of you and in front of an ad. Search is this beautiful moment, right, where advertisers do all these crazy things to come up with demographics and placements to try and hope that someone who's maybe thinking about their product sees it and decides to buy it. But search, you don't need to do that guesswork. You know what the user was thinking about because they just typed it into the search box. And so advertisers were so excited about being a part of that moment that they were willing to spend, and even though they were only spending it at pennies at a time, they were willing to pay for that volume and for that targeting. And so I would say don't underestimate the value of small payments and how they add up. And and also what the value of an advertiser, what the value sometimes is to a consumer directly versus what the value to an advertiser is. Because I think that insight is one of the things that's really ultimately strengthened Google's business over time. Like, we could have just charged consumers directly for our search, but I think there was actually a better business opportunity inside the advertising model. And the nice thing is our ads, because they are so targeted and they are really tailored to your search, they're as good as the search results, and arguably they make the search better. On another anecdote, we like to do something called split A/B testing. So you remember I said earlier, Urs told me no more opinions, only data. So one of the things we always do is try and run two versions of things on the website. So if we're going to make a change, we run one version with it the old way, one version with it the new way. And so when we introduced advertising onto the site, we had one set of users that didn't get the ads and one that did, because we wanted to make sure over time that people kept searching at the same rates and all of that. And I was the person who coded that experiment. And we did it, and we were like, okay, it looks pretty healthy. And obviously, we wanted to make money on the site, and it looked like the experiment was pretty healthy. So we decided to go ahead with the full-on ad launch. But we decided we should keep the experiment running over time just to see what would happen. And of course, then, per my story that I talked about earlier, I moved closer and closer to product management and ultimately became a product manager. And embarrassingly enough, I kind of forgot about the experiment that I had running. And so about 2 years ago, one of the ads product managers was like, Marissa, there's this experiment called No Ads at All that's apparently been running for 9 years. And our advertisers get kind of frustrated because every now and then they get put in it and they can't see their own ads. So I guess running split A/B experiment in the history of the web, right? So it's kind of like the tallest tree in the forest. I was like, if you're going to chop it down, let's at least see what we found out. And the interesting thing that we found out was that people with ads versus people without ads actually searched more, which was an amazing finding. So basically, I think it was that they basically searched 2 or 3% more when they had ads. So basically, what we had seen over all those years was that our ads actually do make the search better. People conclusively like the results better because of the ads, and they do add something. And so I think that was the other key insight, that a lot of times you can add monetization to something, and it's not a net negative, it's actually a net positive, not only in terms of the money, but in terms of the user experience and the user value added.
My name is Simeon. I'm the innovation lead for social network called Story Spaces. Mine is more on the social strategy for Google. With Plus One, it looked like you're into sharing and getting people to share relevant things. But with the new Plus, Google Plus, it looks like you're targeting finding an identity in digital spaces. Is that where your social strategy is headed, or is it?
We think it's both, and we think that you actually can't, you can't do one without the other. That basically, who you are, who you want to share with, is tied to your identity, and whether or not the person you're sharing with wants to receive what you're sharing is in fact tied to your identity, right? I may want to share this with the world, but they want to know that, oh, this came from me, and we think that it's all very intertwined. So the notion of sharing and identity are in fact very intertwined, and in fact the system is designed in fact to support a really solid identity model that facilitates more reliable sharing and more flexible sharing between people with the use of the circles model.
Okay. My name is Laban. I work for a local IT company and also provide consultant services to government startups, especially CRP systems.
Can you hold the mic closer, please?
Yeah, so my address has 3 aspects. One of them is advice, one of them is concern, then question. So you said in one part of your address that you did programming. So I'm really interested in the specific technology you're proficient in, and your advice. Of late, there are so many frameworks, technologies for a programmer. Choosing one will be sort of difficult, because when you go on all of them are the best. So how do you pick one? Even in persistence, there's Juice, there's Spring and all that. So an advice on the best framework.
I mean, I kind of tend to be really programming language and programming environment agnostic. I think that you should ultimately, you know, a lot of what matters in technology is speed. And you should figure out, you know, what can you and your developers actually turn out the code and the application and the final product in the fastest. So I do believe there's some expedience. And obviously I'm very allegiant to some of Google's technologies and tools just because I grew up with them, I understand how they work, and so things like the Google Web Toolkit, like GWT, and Google App Engine are things that I think, especially if you're going to build a web service, like they're actually very good things to build on top of, but which you know, programming languages you use in those contexts, you know, is kind of up to you.
Don't do evil the same as actively doing good?
So the Don't Be Evil story is actually a great story. So I've said, you know, Google from the very beginning was very engineering driven, and you know, the engineers really have always wanted to call the shots. Have been, you know, really the driving force behind the technology. We were very small. It was July of 1999. We had our first business people that had arrived in sort of like the May-June timeframe, and they had set up a very important meeting with a potential partner, the Washington Post. And there's this guy, Amit Patel, the one who interviewed me on his first day of the job. He's got very neat handwriting. In fact, I call it Patel sans serif because he likes to leave these like really immaculately written notes around the company. And I remember the day before, like Amit came and he was like all worked up. And he was like, you know, Joan has set up this meeting with the Washington Post. And I said, yeah. And he's like, what do you think they're going to ask us to build? Like, do you think they're going to ask us to build the right thing? She's like, I want to build what we want to build. I'm not sure I want to build stuff just because it's going to get us a deal. And like, he was really, really like kind of fired up about the whole thing. And I was like, you know what? I mean, like, I just don't know. But like, you know, we're all having fun. We're coding. We're building the search engine. Like, it's exciting. Like, you know, and but I could tell Amit was still kind of lathered up about it. And then. And he was like, you know, so he was really worried about it. And I remember talking to Joan that afternoon while she was in the meeting. So after the meeting, she talked to me about it. And while she was in the meeting, she was sitting there presenting the Washington Post, asking them, because we wanted to run site search on their site, which we ultimately did win the contract to do. But while Joan was talking, she was like sitting there talking, and all of a sudden she spied out of the corner of her eye, written in like super neat Patel sans serif in the bottom corner of one of the whiteboards, "Don't be evil." Like Amit had like left her this note on the whiteboard, and she said she spent the whole rest of the meeting like really worried that the Washington Post was going to see this and like wonder what it was about. But that's really how it was born, and then about 2 years later, we had these HR folks who wanted us to put together the core values of the company. So they basically gathered up a bunch of old timers and made us sit down and say, like, well, what are the values of a Googler? Like, what does it mean to be googly? And we were like, you know, like, frankly, we were just not that into this whole HR exercise. They wanted us to like come up with 10 values. And so Paul Buchheit and Amit and I had all been office mates, and all three of us were in this exercise. And Paul Buchheit was just like, you know, like, why don't we just use Amit's phrase, like, don't be evil? And so, you know, we pushed back. And so we were allowed one. They actually ultimately crafted 9 other values, and don't be evil was the 10th value, but we actually, like, got it through that it should be written as don't be evil rather than do good. So it's not because we don't want to proactively do good. We do. We just thought it was catchier to say don't be evil. And it also had a little bit of our old folklore from Amit, giving his little like subliminal notes to Joan on the whiteboard. So.
How did Google create awareness in such a short time to 400,000 people?
Well, remember that it was 400,000 searches, so that wasn't necessarily people. So, for example, like if they were like each doing like 40 searches a day, which some of our early people were like very much devotees, like it may have been like 10,000 people. In fact, like for the first 5 years of Google, I collected funny quotes that people said and with attributions. And one of my favorite funny quotes was we all went on an all-company outing, and it was skiing. And of course, because you know we were all kind of computer scientists and geeks, but no one really knew if we'd be good skiers. And I remember Sergey getting up at the front of the bus as we pulled up to the ski hill, and he said, you know, today Google will face its greatest challenge. And he's like, and no, it's not whether or not we can all get from the top to the bottom of the slope without injuring ourselves or others. It's just because we will actually finally have to face the fact of how many searches are done when we're not all in the office. Because basically we had a feeling that we were kind of blowing up our own traffic at that point. But basically, the search was really good and it was remarkable. And, people would have this magic moment because you would find something on Google that you couldn't find anywhere else. And there is something really amazing about finding that long-lost person or finding out something that you didn't think you could find out on the web. And it generated a tremendous amount of word of mouth, of people saying, use this. And it spread through everything. We heard as early as, late 1999, early 2000, we heard stories about professors telling their students, use this thing Google, you can find more there than you can find other places. And people saying like, oh, I used Google and I found something I couldn't find anywhere else. And so that really helped. I think the other thing that helped was it was a very memorable name. It was also a very phonetically spelled name. The naming of the company itself is actually pretty funny because 1998 was really late, actually, in terms of naming internet companies. A lot of the good names were taken. And so Larry and Sergey had, at the time they were computer science PhDs, this was before they had dropped out, they kind of started driving all the other computer science PhDs crazy trying to name the company because they were brainstorming their name all the time and they could never settle on anything and everything that they thought of was taken. So they'd be like, okay, like maybe we should name it after trees. And they would like go and like all the trees names, everything that was in the dictionary had already, of course, been taken. And they were brainstorming through all this. And then apparently one night they got onto numbers. And they were like, well, maybe we should call it like million.com or 1,000.com or trillion.com. And of course they were all taken. And then Sergey, being the mathematician, said, well, maybe we should call it Google. And they looked for Google and it was available. And so it was like the middle of the night, they registered it, they named the company, they're like, this is great. Like, it's an internet company, it has 2 O's, that's always really good for internet companies, right? Like, and and they're like, well, the PR story will be that we want to search a Google of information, and we think there's going to be a Google of information out there, which looks like they're going to be right now, and they triumphantly like wrote it on the whiteboard, and their office mate, who they had driven crazy for the previous 2 or 3 months trying to name their company, walked in the morning. They were like, Lucas, it's over. Like, we're not going to drive you crazy trying to name the company anymore. We picked it, and it's going to be called Google. 2 O's, good for internet companies, like great PR story, blah, blah, blah. And Lucas was like, that is great, but you misspelled it. Because Google, the number is Googol. Which, of course, Larry and Sergey are both such horrible spellers, neither of them knew. And it was actually a good thing that they couldn't spell because Googol, because it was in the dictionary, was actually taken, where Google was not. And so, I think we also lucked out because most people, when they hear Google, they spell it the way that we spell it, and that actually helped facilitate the word of mouth as well. So I think, if we had actually been named after the number, we would have had a much rougher go at it.
I just wanted your thoughts on what you think is the potential in that area in location-based services vis-a-vis the privacy concerns that surround that.
Sure. I think that one of the reasons I moved over to this area is because I think there's just going to be an amazing amount of innovation here. One of the things, is that when we talked about the open web and how is mobile going to connect to it, I think that one of the amazing things that happens with a mobile phone is it's your cursor in both places. Right? To the extent that your cursor says, here's where I am, right? Like your mobile phone says, here's where I am in the physical world, and it can also relate to the digital world. So, when I'm, here at iHub, like I can actually, my phone tells you that I'm at iHub, and it could pull all kinds of interesting information off of the web to do that. So, today I think it starts with check-ins and things that are very explicit, and sharing, and Google Latitude, and being able to express being able to express location, and we're very conservative and explicit with privacy at this point. Later we'll continue to be that explicit with privacy, but I think that there will be so much more functionality available if you allow a service to know a little bit more about your location, a little bit more about your context, right? Like, if you come to iHub every day, the information you shouldn't probably get background information on iHub. You should get your email, you should get the news, you should get the stuff that's relevant to you, you should get information about the talk that's happening next week, right? But for me, as a tourist here at iHub, I should get the background and the story and, like which companies are here. And I think that you can start to pull all of this. We call it contextual discovery, because basically it's not search. It's, right, it's basically search before you search. Can we figure out what information you would need or want or would be useful to you without you having to ask for it. And I think with a little bit of your location and also a little bit of your history and context, we can start to do some amazing things. And things that would a few years ago have seemed very sci-fi are in the very near term going to be available. And I think those will be compelling enough that people will say, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my privacy in order to have that functionality. That said, most of that information will be stored on your phone, right? And while it may be transmitted to a service, you'll be in control of that information. It'll be on your phone, and you'll decide who actually gets access to that as part of their algorithms, as part of their services. And so, while we need to be very careful with it and transparent, what do we know? How do we use it? And give users lots of choice, so they can say, I want you to know where I am now. I want you not to know later tonight, right? Those kinds of the elements of control, I think those will be very important. I think that the amount of functionality you're going to get out of it is really going to cause a lot of people to say, this is the right trade-off for me because I can be so much more efficient if I actually have this.
Great. My name is Salim. I have a quick comment and a quick question. Now the comment is on the social space. The common saying is that everybody is on Facebook, but actually that's not the truth. You're looking at Facebook has a penetration of 1 million in Kenya out of the 9.5 million people who are on data. So that's 9%. That means 91% don't see value in Facebook, and that's where the challenge for Google Plus is. Now to my question. Google is, just like 2 months ago, they started hosting the Kenya Gazette. And it was an exciting thing. We saw it online, and everybody could search newspapers up to 1904. But now, just the other day, Google closed down Google Health, and PowerMate is going down. Now, what assurances or possibly things like, how do you look at that, given the fact that the government is looking at partnering with Google to put most of